Good morning, guys and gals. Brenton from Backwaters and Backroads here, obviously. We are driving home, Northland, Superior Land, for a few weeks. Get some stuff done. I left the vagabond down in Florida, some of you might already know. And I'm going to head back down there in March and have a Winter Beagle Escape Part 2. So I figured I'd try to tell you guys a story time with Brenton. Haven't done that in a while. Sometimes these long drives are perfect time to do it. And I tried to do it in about 20 minutes or less. And I was sitting here driving, thinking about what would be a good story that I could tell you, and also I can remember, because it's going on quite a while on some of these. I have been pretty much a lifelong adventurer, but back when I was young, in my teens and 20s and even early 30s, I was beyond poor. I was just living on nothing. I was so poor. And so it's hard to call those adventures. Some people would argue that that's what an adventure is, but it was tough. Not that I have much money now, but I have enough to kind of, just get by, I guess. This truck here, speaking of getting by. So, okay, I'm going to try to tell you the story of the 3 times that I have been to Alaska. And all 3 times have been a dismal failure to some degree. To the point where I think I can conclude that God and the universe does not want me to live in Alaska or even go to Alaska. First time I went to Alaska was the late 90s. I want to say it was like 1998 or so. And I was really, really poor. And when I say that, I don't mean like, I was working hard and poor. I could not hold a job. I would just get these crappy jobs, washing dishes, working in restaurants, things like that, day labor and stuff, and just making hardly any money, living on people's couches sometimes, paying them $50 a month for rent. You could kind of do that back in the 90s. The 90s was such a different time, for the youngsters that are watching this. Most of my viewers are roughly my age or older, which is fine by me. But I know there's some young ones too, and I know there's a few women too, which so welcome, and you're always welcome. Glad to have you here. And for the young ones, the younger viewers, the 90s were a totally different world, for a lot of reasons that I won't get into, because I want to keep this under 20 minutes or less. But I was living in Seattle for a few years. I lived there twice. I lived there in the late 90s for, I want to say, a year or two. And then I lived there in the mid-2000s for a couple years. Different circumstances, but... And in the late 90s, I'm trying to think what's relevant here, but make a long story short, I was like renting a room from this friend of mine. It happened to be a lady friend. She was a lady, but we were just friends, a woman, and we were just friends. And, I would always hear about how people would go up to Alaska and work on, like, fishing boats and crab processors and, crab boats and stuff like that, and make, a lot of money in a fairly short amount of time. And I was, I wanted to do that. I wanted to make, a chunk of money. And at that time, I probably, had some aspirations to, buy like a camper van or buy like a vehicle that would keep running. And, I had a lot of crappy vehicles. And a lot of good ones too, but I was so tired of living on next to nothing. And I thought, well, if I could get, $10,000 together, which again, in the late 90s, $10,000 was a lot more money than $10,000 is now. Not that $10,000 isn't a lot of money now, too, but it was like, you could double the kind of like intrinsic value that $10,000 would have back in 1998 or so. Weird to say, but it's true. And so, I kept hearing about these jobs, And this is before the internet, or the internet was just getting started. I certainly had nothing to do with the internet at that time, and I can't remember how I went about this, but there was this area in Seattle. There still is. I'm sure it's still there. It's Brainerd. I think. No, I'm sorry. It's Ballard. Brainerd is in Minnesota. Ballard is in Seattle, and it's where it's kind of known for. There were fishing boats from Alaska and in the region, Pacific Northwest. They come in and that's like their home port, and they come and refit and retool and then go back up to Alaska and stuff like that. So I think I went down to Ballard and started asking questions, and people kind of pointed me around and, oh, go here and go there. And I found out that, yes, it was winter, by the way. It was like, I want to say it was like November or something. And, I found out that there is a crab season up in Alaska, and they were looking for workers on a crab processor. Various, outfits were. And I landed on this place. I still remember the name. It was Trident Industries. And they were looking for people to work on their crab processor, which is a floating crab processor. I want to say it was 100 and something feet long, massive ship, not just a boat, but a ship. And, they were hiring, let's say, 400 people. And they didn't pay a lot, but you got tons of hours. I mean, this is probably the case now, too, is, these places, back then, I want to say I was going to make like $8 or $9 an hour, which, again, is like 15, 18 bucks an hour now, because of the inflation rate and so forth. Which wasn't a whole lot of money, but you would work, you could work like 16 hours a day. I mean, they will just work you brutally, while they have you. And the gigs usually lasted like, I want to say 3 months, 2 or 3 months, something like that, maybe 4 months. And of course the winter gig is, pretty harsh up there, but I felt I was up to it, and that money sounded great. I heard the numbers like, oh yeah, well, also I should add that they house you and they feed you, so in theory, you're kind of getting paid twice, because you get accommodations and you get fed, and then there's no place to really spend your money up there, so your money's just getting banked away. And that's another good way to save money. So I'll circle back around to how I kind of discovered the pros and cons of that tactic of trying to save money. But so, I signed up for Trident Industries, and I, on the crab boat, and crab processor, I should say. And they were leaving, I want to say, in like a week. And they were, like 200 people could ride up on the ship, and then they were going to fly up the rest of the workers, later. And we were going to be based out of St. George Island, which I will try, when I go back to process this video, I will try to put a little blip in here to show you where St. George Island is. Because, it's way out there. There's probably not very many places on Earth that are more remote than these couple of islands out in the Bering Sea. St. George and it's a couple of saints. The other ones, we'll see when I make this video. But there's little rocks out in the Bering Sea, about probably closer to Russia than the U.S., up above the Aleutian Island chain. I mean, it is just way out there in the middle of nowhere. And it was really hard to get to. And so I decided to jump on ride up on the ship. And, I thought that was a great adventure. It was a great adventure. It was in some ways like worth the whole experience, because, we got to go up the Inner Passage, we got to go through Alaska and all that. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So I got someone flanking me here looking at the sea dory on towing. Everyone loves the little sea dory. So, and I had this girlfriend at the time. She was actually one of the the ones that got away or the ones I wish I had a chance, I had a chance with again. She was great. I remember her name. Her name was Tess. And she really liked me. And she was great. She was like, let's see, in 1998, I was like 26 or 7, I guess. 26, something like that. And she was probably, I think she was right around my age, maybe just a year or two older, 27, 28, something like that. And she worked at a bank, and she was very responsible, but she was also kind of, adventurous, and she was a great, they used to make them better back in the day, and she was very cute and fit, and I was attracted to her, and, we liked each other, but, I had nothing going for me in so many ways. No money, no clue as to what I wanted to do with my life, no way to figure out a good way to get through in life, and let alone try to, have something to offer another person, a woman, and self-esteem problems and just a whole lot of stuff I was working out. It took a long time to work out. And I'm glad that I'm still here to kind of reap some benefits of some of the things I did end up working out. But back in the day, when I was in my 20s, I was in the thick of it. Not like drugs or anything really serious like that. And I'm always so thankful that I never, got into drugs or never got into drinking. Well, I won't go there, but I didn't become a full-blown alcoholic and stuff like that. So, my problems were different, but they weren't those. They can be very, very destructive, obviously. And so, she and I told her, I said, yeah, I'm going to go up to Alaska, just work for a few months, and come back and I'll have some money, and we'll have more options and stuff. She thought that was great, and she was the type of girl where she would, stick with me and be loyal. I remember she gave me a picture of her, like a little framed picture to take with me. She was going to write me. I think she did write me, a few times, but so she, probably would have been one that would have been there when I got back, and I wouldn't have to worry about, female hypergamy and cheating and things like that. So, and so I got, she dropped me off at the boat, and we, I went and found my accommodations, and, the way this ship worked out is there was kind of the crew, which was probably 20 people that kind of worked on the boat, and then there's us, the peons, the plebs, the proletariats, going up there to just, make some money, working our tails off. And I got a room, that there was, there'd be like 4 or 5 guys per room on the ship. And you just had these little bunks with these curtains, that you would pull to have a little bit of privacy. And when I say guys, I mean it. Like there was like, let's say 400 people total working for this Trident Industries outfit, on St. George Island once we got there and all established. And there might have been 5 or 6 females. And I've always remembered this, that was just such a, well, I'll probably touch upon some of that on this story. And I better get expediting this a little bit because there's 2 more, trips to Alaska I need to talk about. So, I got in the boat and we, left, and I got my room, my bunk. And I remember there was a young man from Arkansas, and he had an Arkansas accent, southern accent. Arkansas is a little different than Texas or Tennessee or anything. All those regional accents are a little different when you know what you're listening for. And he was a really nice guy. He had these, like, he had good manners. I remember, like, you'd do something for him, or, hey, if you go to the cafeteria, bring me back a cookie or something like that, and when you, bring it to him, he'd be like, I appreciate it. He'd look you right now, I go, appreciate it. And I have that to this day. I actually, sometimes I'll do that. I'll, be paying for my gas or get something at a store or whatever, and I'll walk, as I pay for everything and conclude the interlude, I'll say, I appreciate it, and I'll walk away. And I always just thought that was like a really good, authentic, different way of kind of like a nicety, and so I got that from him. And then there was this, there was a couple other guys that I can't remember a whole lot of details about, in that room, but I do remember this one young man. He was from Michigan. I remember that. And he was one of these kind of alpha studly types, you know, that all, you know, the girls just could not resist a guy like him, you know, for some reason. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, right? You know, strapping young lad. And he told us that he was a little bit arrogant, but he was also, you know, in the same boat as many of us, where he just tried to find himself and clean himself up. You know, I think he probably had a drinking problem or something like that. His story was he came from Michigan to Seattle in a car. I don't know if it was even his car. He might have stole it. He told us his story. He was a very honest guy. And he would just pull up to gas stations and fill it up and then just hang it up. And, you know, it was back before, you know, it was back when there was a lot more trust in society, just even in the 90s. And you could pump your gas and then go in and pay. They trusted you, you know. And this was right at the end of that, you know. And he would just pump up and leave. You know, gas and go, I think is what they would call it. Dine and dashes and gash and goes and all that. You know, just one minor little step away from just straight up thievery and robbing banks, you know. And he would just blast off. He said one time, I'll never forget this, he was telling us a story about, you know, that. And he said he was filling up the, you know, the gas at some little town somewhere in who knows where, Montana or something. And the clerk came out and was kind of standing there watching him and, you know, just kind of shooting the shit with him. And this young man just handed him the pump, handed him the nozzle. You know, didn't even hang it up, just handed it to him and got in the car. And the guy was just like, you know, hung it up. And he's like, you know, what are you doing? You know, he's kind of stunned. He's like, I'm leaving. He's like, well, we're going to call the cops. He's like, go ahead. And he just, like, you know, took off and took some back roads, or, you know, just kind of got off the, you know, the highway for a while or something like that. Or maybe the guy was so stunned, or who knows, right? But, like, I guess the point of this is that this guy got from Michigan to Seattle, doing, you know, having no money and just stealing gas and food. And I'd probably abandon the car, you know, with it running with the doors open somewhere on some back street, you know. And he did it. He did it without going to jail and getting pulled over and arrested and all that, which is, you know, another testament to, like, how the world was different, and, you know, who knows, a lot of factors, right? And this young man was such a stud that the 5 girls that I talked about that were in this crew, you know, going up to Alaska, I'd say 3 of them visited his bunk on the trip up. They would, you know, kind of duck into our room and duck behind his curtain, and, you know, you can only imagine, you know, you can imagine what they did, right? I don't need to tell you. And then, you know, her friend would, you know, come the next night, you know, and like, and I remember just a couple details about these women. You know, they started out, you know, looking at some damage. Truck flipped over. You know, they started out, like, you know, wearing makeup and doing their hair to a certain extent, and kind of, you know, being presentable like, you know, women will do. And, you know, by the end of the trip, they were not wearing makeup, and their hair was just pulled back in a ponytail. Anyway, whatever, you know, cute girls are cute girls. You know, a lot of women never believe us guys when we tell them, like, you don't really have to dress up that much. We're attracted to you anyways, you know, if we are attracted to them. And these girls, you know, kind of gave up the whole presenting themselves in their best light, you know, halfway through the trip. You know, I don't blame them. It's a lot of work. And, you know, it's just a bunch of scummy, you know, riffraff from the 4 corners of America going up to Alaska to try to make some money, right? So, and plus, you know, like female nature, that never gets really talked about honestly, is like, they just honed in on the Chads, you know. The manosphere community calls them Chads, you know, Chads and Stacys. And so all these Stacys, you know, like, just honed in on Chad, which happened to be our Michigan, you know, the gas stealer, you know. And so he had a great old time going up, and he started, you know, we tried to include him in, and we got a little, you know, crew together. We're playing cards. I remember, like, I've never been a big card guy, you know, playing cards, and so it just seemed like a big waste of time, but, you know, there's nothing else to do, and so we would just, you know, play cards and tell stories and stuff like that. And participated for a while, but then he kind of decided he was too good for us. And he, had that alpha presence, I suppose. And so the crew of the ship, we're looking for a couple more crew members, kind of graduate from proletariat peon, hold on a second, let me get by this guy here, to like an actual, if it was a law firm, they were looking for, what do you call a law firm? Like you become a member, a paid, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like, you became part of the crew where you could actually make, a percentage of the take of the whole operation. Like, I mean, it's a big deal to graduate to that. And for, somehow, some reason, they took this guy on and he moved out of our room. And, to wrap up him, the story of him, he actually jumped ship. Well, he didn't jump ship at that. Once we got to St. George Island, we had crab boats, come like doing their crab boating thing, and in the Bering Sea, like you'll see on these shows, now these days on Discovery Channel and stuff. And he got a job on one of these crab boats. I don't know how, but like he would jump down in the holds and help them unload. He was a go-getter. There's no doubt about it. Like he had this thing about him where he had something to prove, and he was gonna like make something of himself, And he jump down the holds and unload the crabs and this and that. And he's a go-getter, which is what people look for, And somehow he talked his way on to becoming a crew member on one of these crab boats, because he just kept trying to up the ante on the adventure of the whole thing. And so he got off of the Trident's Industry crab processor and got on one of these crab boats, and we never saw him again. And hoped it worked out for him. And so that's the story of him. We didn't see him much after that. He thought he was better than us, and he started avoiding us all the time and stuff. And whatever, that's fine. Hold on a second, I got a little interchange coming here. I gotta jump on. I'm gonna pause it here for a second, guys. Okay, guys, I'm back. So, where did we leave off? There was, Michigan Chad. We'll call him Chad. So the trip up was pretty cool. Especially for a 26-year-old, 27-year-old, young man who didn't have any money to do I couldn't have, at that time, probably done a ferry trip, Alaskan ferry trip up there. It took basically the same route. We left Seattle, went up through Canada, Queen Charlotte Islands, and eventually, went across the big water through a pass in the Aleutians. So we were, this wasn't just Alaska. This was like, way, way up there. And the weather got really bad. It was probably like a 7-8 day trip, I want to say. And I remember once we got on the other side of the Aleutians, we were, in the Bering Sea, the weather got really rough. It was like that stuff you would see on TV. It was like massive, massive waves. This was a full-blown, ship, and we were crashing through, the waves to St. George. And there was a couple of nights where we had to you had to tie yourself off to get to the cafeteria, to go get food. You had to actually wear kind of a harness and run down these ropes outside the ship, on the outside of the cabin of the ship. It was a massive cabin. Like we'd leave our room, and then we had to actually go outside on the outside deck of the ship and go down some stairs and stuff to the cafeteria and stuff. And so, and they would, you had to clip yourself in, to go down through. And I have never gotten seasick. I feel very blessed that I've never been a person that gets seasick, because I love, water adventures. Except that one trip, that night, the ship was just I mean, I don't even know where to begin. It was like 20 footers or something. I mean, this was just massive, perfect storm type stuff that probably happens all the time up there in the winter. And I got so seasick that I had to lay down, and, it was bad. I knew for sure that I couldn't be one of these, crew members that had to work out on the deck, like that. Because if you get really, for those that have never been seasick, if you get a severe kind of case of it, it's nothing you can really do about it. It has something to do with your equilibrium and, your body reacting to the up and down, motion and, gravity. Who knows? I mean, maybe I'll try to find a link in the description, maybe I'll try to find an explanation for it. But, it's bad, and it's, there's no getting around it. Like, you're useless. You're wanting to throw up, you're wanting to pass out, you're wanting to, it's like vertigo. And I found that out, and so we made the trip, and we got there, and we docked at St. George, and Trident had buildings up there, bunkhouse buildings, like permanent structures up there, because they go up there all the time. And then the rest of the folks that were going to work that season, I think flew up, and I mean, that's the only way to get there, boat in or fly in. I do remember that either all of St. George Island, or at least a big part of it, belonged to a native tribe. And they would, Trident Industries would lease their port there. And one of the benefits of going up was I got to, kind of ask questions and get to know a little more about, because to a certain extent, they gave the option to the folks riding up on the boat. You got a little bit of a privilege or a step up to pick your job to a certain extent. Because there's just so many different types of jobs. There's working down in the hull of the ship, processing the actual crab, and then there's various stages of processing the crab and this and that. And somehow I, figured out that one of the best jobs for the, peons that are going up there was, to work on the I guess you would call it like the shipping, the container side of it, where, what they had is they had containers that eventually got loaded onto different ships, mostly heading to China and Japan and all that. And, there was big conveyor belts that would bring the boxes up, the crab already, completely processed and boxed up, and the only thing left is to load them on into containers going to their destinations. So you're hardly even, doing anything with the crab. At that point, you just boxes of crab, right? The challenge to that was you worked outside, so in the extreme cold, but they gave you overalls and, all the equipment, all the good cold weather gear to do it, of course. And you're working so hard that you burn so much calories, you're generating so much heat that I've found this out living in the Northland. It's like, it could be almost any temperature, and if you're active enough, you could be sweating, it's just the way it works. And so I decided to take that job, along with a couple of the guys from my room, the bunk mates. The guy from Arkansas was another guy that was, we kind of became friends. Oh, Dylan. There was a guy named Dylan. I don't know. I just remembered him. He was a nice guy, too. He was like, kind of a little hippie kid, an idealist, and having an adventure of his own in his own way, and he was a nice guy. And he worked, so it was Dylan, and then we'll call him Arkansas, and then me, and then maybe one other guy. And it was a pretty steady clip, those conveyor belts would really get moving, and we had to catch the boxes and kind of walk by each other and on the loading dock. And we got really good at it, which anything you do in a repetitious nature like that, you're gonna get good at. And we could, catch the boxes with one hand and throw them up on the top of the, the pile, the right. There was like 3 different types of crab, and one of the things we had to do is pay attention to what kind of crab was coming up. One had red tape, one box had red tape on it, and that was, let's just call it king crab. and that went in a certain container, and then another one was like, what are the other types of crab, like, let's just call it white crab or whatever. Had a different color tape on the box, and so you had to make sure they were going in the right places. And sometimes they would try to trip us up to test us, They would send let's say a king crab up at the wrong conveyor belt, and if we weren't paying enough attention, we could load it in the wrong container. And then they would let us get a pile, like a row or two deep, and then they would come and tell us, okay, you loaded. They knew we did it. They were just testing us, kind of messing with us, trying to keep us on our toes, basically. And they'd make us dig it out and put it in the right one, and all while the conveyor belts are going. So you had to double time it, digging one out, loading in another spot, and while keeping up with the normal pace. And they did that to us a couple times, and we were working 16-hour shifts. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. You basically had to fit in eating and sleeping and showering and brushing your teeth and everything into 8 hours. Because when you're up there, you're just going. They would work. There was even an option to work 20 hours a week, 20 hours a day. I couldn't do that. I could barely do 16 hours. And you start to get, worn down, and you adjust. You find your limits, and if you're young and everything, you don't need as much. You adjust to your sleep patterns and things like that. But you get kind of grumpy. Everyone gets grumpy. You're working in the dark, because in the winter the sun hardly ever came up, and it was hard work. There was just that was probably the hardest work I did. But when I finish up the story here, you'll see that, So I remember one night, we were working, and they threw the little, we had a name for it, but I forget what it was. They threw the wrong box on the wrong conveyor belt. He came up, and we, the crew member came out. He was a nice guy. I remember his name. His name was Brent. I remember we would always bond on that. He's like, oh, your name's, I either answered by Brent or Brenton, we had the same name, And I also remember, I grew out my beard for the first time, during that trip, to try to keep my face warm. And then I got some stupid reason, I don't know, felt like I had a good reason. I shaved it all off again. And I remember he gave me a lot of crap about it. He's like, what are you doing, shaving your beard off in the middle of the Bering Sea in the middle of winter and working outside and so that. It was a dumb idea, but these little details that I remember. But he came out one night and he's like, we gotcha. It was always like a gotcha, like, we gotcha. There's a king crab in the white crab, container. Go dig it out. We gotcha. And it was kind of somewhat playful, and just they're just trying to keep us on our toes. Make sure that we're not just going on autopilot and making a bunch of mistakes. One of the cool things about that job is you weren't just kind of side by side picking through a conveyor belt full of, crab parts. It was one of the better jobs. We had to have some strength, and you had to have some stamina, which I certainly had at that time. And we could just have these long conversations, talking to each other, passing each other on the loading dock. And when we got really good at, you get a half a sentence out. I'd be walking by Arkansas, and I'd be like, blah, 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 and then he'd be going back to the conveyor belt to catch the next box, and we just pause it mid-sentence. I'd throw my box up, and then I'd be passing him on the way back, and I'd just continue the sentence that I was at. And we had these, disjointed conversations, because you would just do it for 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. We got so good and so adjusted at all that. And so Brent, gotcha with the box, and that, it just pissed us off that night. I don't know if we were just having a bad day or if people didn't have enough sleep. And it really pissed us off, and we all kind of had this mini rebellion, this mini mutiny, where we're getting in Brent's face and stop doing that to us, our job's hard enough, and blah blah. And he was a nice guy. He wasn't going to be like Mr. Pushback. He was like, it's okay, all right, okay, guys, I won't do that for a while. And it's just part of my job. It's quality control. I got to do it. He's trying to explain it to us. He was a nice guy. And we were mad. We were irritated and mad, and they had to shut down the conveyor belt for a minute, which of course stops the whole operation. The entire ship comes to a stop anytime some aspect of it, some stage of it stops, you know? And so we got past that, but I think what the crew saw was we did have some limits to our easygoingness, and, you know, I don't know, that changed things a little bit, you know, but now I'm going to get to the aspect of this story that was really the clincher, okay? So on the way up, you know, I can't remember if we got to pick where we were gonna, you know, our bunks, you know, where we were gonna sleep. You know, everyone that came up on the boat, you know, got the option to stay, you know, right where we ended up on the way up. You know, we got a little bit of privilege, I want to say, you know, from like coming up on the boat. And I think it was better. Well, honestly, I don't know about this, but, you know, I guess there was this attitude that, like, it's better to be on the boat than in the bunkhouses on the island, because you're right there. You can just, when it's bedtime, you just go up to your bunk and try to get some sleep and stuff, as opposed to, like, getting on a shuttle and going back to the bunks and stuff like that. And so what I didn't realize, this was just really bad luck, is that our room with our bunks was right next to the crane, the crane on top of the ship that picks up the crab pots, and, you know, it was a massive crane. There was a couple of them, I think, on the ship, you know, that have to be there to, you know, unload the crab boats. And it was right on the other side of the wall from our room. It reminds me, you know, of this, the famous title of one of the books, you know, famous sailing books, you know, 10 years before the mast or something like that. You know, it's like, well, this was like, you know, 4 months, 4 months before the crane room. It's like, and I didn't know, none of us knew this, you know, on the way up, because the cranes weren't running. But once we got the operation going, the cranes were going, it was like, okay, so you have 8 hours to cram in, you know, everything and get some sleep. And you try to go to bed, and all you can hear right on the other side of the wall is almost this deafening wah 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 wah. It was like every time it, you know, the crane picked up a big heavy load, it would bog down and wah 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 wah. So it wasn't only like this irritating sound, but it wasn't consistent. It was just constantly changing pitch and tone, and just, you know, wah wah wah. Every once in a while it's squeaking. It was so frickin', it was torturous. It was actually a type of torture, at least to me. I can be a sensitive sleeper. I mean, like, I need to have, you know, a certain, like, it's funny that I would say this because I sleep in the back of my truck, and I sleep in tents, and I sleep, you know, in weird places and abandoned houses and stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, I have to have some silence, or let's just say, you know, not any, like, lots and lots of noise, you know, and I have to have a little bit of dark too. You know, and I learned to just pull my stocking cap over my eyes to get that. But, like, there was almost no way to kind of sleep through this. I mean, I would find myself like an hour into getting to sleep, and then it would jar me awake for some reason. I'd be almost asleep or just barely asleep. All of a sudden, you know, start making this god awful, you know, noise trying to pick something up, and it was driving me crazy. And anybody that doesn't get enough sleep, you know, everybody has a limit. You have a breaking point. You know, it was one of the ways the military, like, tortured people in Abu Ghraib or whatever, you know, Guantanamo or whatever. They just, you know, sleep deprivation is a timeless, known form of torture, right? So, you know, I wasn't the only one. There was someone else, you know, in our bunk room that had that, you know, was having a problem with that too. But I was probably the worst case of it. So I remember I went to that Brent guy, and I was like, dude, I can't sleep in that room. And before I could even get that out, they knew what I was talking about. They're like, oh, are you in the, the blah, 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 room 3 or the crane room or next to the crane room, whatever. And I was like, yes. And they're like, oh, yeah, we have that problem all the time. Every year there's always someone in that can't sleep in that room. And I'm like, okay, well, you gotta move me out of that room because I can't sleep. And I can't handle this. This is like, it takes everything you got to do that job for a few months at 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's just a fact. And he got together with another crew guy, and they were like, oh, no, we can't. Like, I mean, what would happen is we would just put you, take you out of that room and go put you somewhere else, and then the person we put in your place would have that problem. Like, everybody, no one can. Basically, what they were saying without saying was, everybody's got a problem sleeping in that room, and so, tough shit, that's going to be your problem. You're the guy that's got to put up with it. And, I can't remember this, but I can only assume this, is that it probably had something to do with the 26, 27-year-old version of yours truly, the host of Backwaters here, Backwaters Brenton. I wasn't, I was probably hard to like. I just would I was very opinionated, and I wasn't very, I was pretty self-absorbed, in the sense of trying to, fix my own problems, figure myself out, figure out the world. I was very moody and broody, and I could get mad easy. I've come a long way of reconciling and kind of curing myself of being a reactionary person and reacting to my anger and irritation and stuff like that. Anxiety, all the root of it is always anxiety, for everybody. And stress and anxiety, and that was a very stressful situation. That job was extremely stressful. It almost took a Buddha type quality to not let it get to you. And you couple, you pile on not being able to get enough sleep, and I was probably a very irritable person. I remember one time I think, to get back to that time they got you on the box, up there on the loading dock, I probably was doing a lot of, yelling and swearing and, why do you do this to us? And being, what's the word? Insubordinate, And I remember that Brent guy kind of pulled me aside. He's like, calm down, it's okay. It was he was always a nice guy trying to work with everybody. He had a really good manner about him that way. I do remember that. But they probably just kind of labeled me as this loose cannon type, you stay out of his way, or you just, whatever. And that does, you don't get a lot of compassion when you're like that, And so, they very well could have if I wasn't one of those folks, they could have found, let's say somebody else was a loose cannon that they were going to prove something, teach them a lesson. They could have swapped me out and I could have got some sleep. But they didn't. They basically told me to suck it up, tough shit. You're staying there regardless. And so I want to say I was probably, stuck it out for another week or so. And I was cracking up. I could not sleep. I was just getting this disjointed. I was waking up in, cold sweats, and I just couldn't get any REM sleep. And it was I probably wasn't eating very good either because, we were, the cafeteria was you could eat, they fed us good. I mean, they had all that seafood, right? So they fed us awesome. But I was, probably eating cookies and coffee and, just crap food that I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to that. I wasn't aware of how also your diet can be, a big factor in what we're talking about. And so, so I remember it was something happened on the dock up there. Well, I also got in this argument with a guy in the cafeteria. Dylan, one of our crew up there on the loading dock, he hit his head, or something hit him in the head, and he had to get a little part of his head shaved, the hair shaved off, and some stitches. It wasn't a big deal. And someone was giving some shit about it, and I felt the need to stick up for Dylan or something like that, which is so stupid. And and then some guy got in my face, and then I got in his face. We got into some shouting match, and then I'm telling you, like, if you're a young man and you're, don't go this way. Like, I don't know, talk about it. Do whatever you want, but like, do yourself a favor and just either know the situation you're in and have some tolerance of it, or remove yourself from it so you don't have to tolerate it. If that makes sense. And so, what ended up happening was something happened up on the dock, and I just got in this big shouting match with either Brent or the other guy, the other crew member that kind of watched over us. And he took me down to the office of the next higher up, one of the main, almost like owners of the boat, into his office. And he's like, what's the problem? It's not like I was the first person. That job attracted a lot of, quasi riffraff, of America. They kind of show up and like, yeah, I'm going to make $10,000 or $12,000, and I'm going to, and I'm going to kick my, whiskey habit, or I'm going to kick my pot habit. Like, there's a lot of, I do remember that too. There's a lot of people going through a lot of withdrawals. I mean, cigarettes was like a huge one. Like, they just couldn't smoke as much as they wanted to, or they didn't have the money to buy cigarettes, or I can't remember. There was like a smoking section that you had to go to, and you never had any time to do it. Another thankful thing that I never picked up, And so I've always had a problem with authority. It's almost like, a rebel without a cause. It's like, what are you rebelling against? What do you got? And I just had, there's reasons for that I won't go into, but like, it was just my personality. It kind of runs in my family. It's like, you can trace it back to like medieval times probably, right? But like, I don't have that problem so much anymore. I mean, I do in the sense that there's a healthy version of that, being anti-authoritarian, especially when you live in an authoritarian, overly authoritarian, tyrannical type society, which I would argue we're almost there, if not there. So there's a good aspect of that, and it's probably a male thing to a certain extent, but like, mine was extreme, and it was actually hurting me more than it was like solving any problems. And so I, was disrespectful to one of the owners in the office and whatever. He's just like, you're out of here. Like, we're getting you out of here. Like, you don't want to be here. And I'm like, you damn straight I don't want to be here. Just give me what you owe me, and I'll be gone. And by that time, I probably had made a couple $1,000s, is my guess, right? And they're like, oh, we got news for you. We're like, we come across this, every season there's a handful of people who, don't work out, and, we have to get you out of here. And guess what? We only have to get you to a Class A city, which means Anchorage. So they could put me on a plane off, out of St. George Island and send me to Anchorage, and then I have to figure out my own way home from Anchorage. And, there was something like this incentive program where, like, you only get $6 an hour if you don't finish the contract, and $9 if you do, and a bonus, and blah, blah, It's like, so I started doing some math on it, and I was like, man, I'm only, I was still going to make a couple grand or something like that. I'm like, that's fine. Just get me out of here. Like, that was my attitude. Get me back to Seattle. I'll have a whole new outlook on life, and, I'll go find myself any old one. I'll throw this in really quick. Is what I realized is that whole Alaskan gig was actually not a big money-making thing. It was just you worked so many hours, and you didn't have any place to spend your money, even though there were lots of people on board that were sending their money home to their wives and girlfriends, and I bet you they came home, with no money because, she was spending it on Chad, another Michigan Chad that didn't go to Alaska, But anyways, so, women don't do that, right? We're not supposed to ever say that women actually do that. But anyways, so he's like, I only have to send, we only have to send you to Anchorage. So go, get your crap together. Plane's leaving tomorrow, whatever. So I don't know if this is smart or not, okay? But maybe you can look at it. You can look at it a couple of ways. Either I was kind of defending myself in their like attempt to try to screw me over, which I was asking for in a way, or if this was a smart thing to do. But you know what I did? I said, you know what? And I looked him right in the eye and I said, I hurt my back up on the loading dock. And he's like, oh. And they look at each other and I'm like, we know what you're doing. And I'm like, doing what? And I just gave him this big bluff. I'm like, I hurt my back. And they sent me out of the room, and then they had a little discussion. They brought me back in. They said, okay, we're going to give you, your $9 an hour. It came out to like, I can't remember, $2,200, I want to say, or something like that. We're like, we're going to give you your $9 an hour, and we're going to fly you all the way back to Seattle. But you're going to sign this piece of paper, this contract that says we have no liability for you. If you hurt yourself on the job or whatever, that's your problem. I mean, it was basically kind of like a release of liability type situation, so I couldn't. Now, I was totally bluffing. I didn't hurt my back. I wouldn't even know about how to go about doing some kind of lawsuit crap. That's not my nature anyways, like, I just kind of pulled it out of the. Now, I think someone must have just told me that's something, to do. Like, oh, if they're going to screw you, just, And so, man, look at this. I don't know if you see this in the truck on the side of the road, guys, with that jackknifed. That's how bad things can get out here. Ouch. So, my ploy worked, sort of, and I got my money, and I got on a little plane. I went to the airport in St. George, like, the next day, said goodbye to everybody, and I flew out of St. George on a little prop plane. It was like a cool little situation, and went to Anchorage, and I had another ticket to go to Seattle, and I was home within like 48 hours. And that was the first time I've ever been to Alaska. If you want to call that, going to Alaska. I mean, I was technically in Alaska, but like it's hard to call it that, right? So this is getting pretty long, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a part 2 of the other 2 times I went to Alaska. Okay, so thanks for sticking around, guys. Thanks for listening. If you're here, man, you're a real trooper, and I appreciate it. Thanks for being interested in my little stories from my past. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.